Hi and welcome to the WEBSTER Report. This is the WEBSTER Report number 5, broadcasting on the 17th of July 2019. Guests that I've got on tonight, many people will not need much of an introduction to Caroline Stevens, but Caroline can do herself a lot more justice than what I can. So without further ado, Caroline, introduce yourself to the people who may or may not know you already, and how the hell did you end up on the path that you have done?
Gosh, thank you, Paul, firstly, for having me on the show. And I'd like to say thank you for everybody watching at home. So a lot of people perhaps don't know, but I'm actually a qualified maths teacher. And, I was a housewife. And then I went to a public meeting and I heard just how much money was being wasted by our politicians in Brussels. Now, I'd just been campaigning for financial education for various charities in schools and meeting politicians. And so I was used to meeting MPs and debating such matters. So going into politics was almost like a natural progression from the charity work that I was doing, going into schools, talking to children about not going into debt. And, it was quite funny because the children might not have been that interested at the time, but certainly the teachers were interested. So at least if you can share that information on with somebody, and then they can educate their kids, they can put certain subject matters in their lessons, and it makes things like compound interest, planning for the future. If you can link maths principles with real life situations, people are much more likely to get it, if you like. So then I went into politics, stood for council, stood for parliament, as a candidate in the Southwest. And then I got the most coveted job, I guess, for Brexiteers, was the job of being the campaign manager for Leave EU. So I travelled around the country and debated with MPs, encouraged and trained, actually. I organised training sessions for the activists on, to do their street stalls and subject matter that they might like to talk about with people on the streets, and not just focus on one or two areas. And so they had lots of armour, if you like, sort of ammunition for the people. And, lo and behold, we did get the Leave vote. So, of course, then it's like, what do we do? You are powerless as an individual in your own right to really make waves in Parliament. So I basically got involved in interviewing people about the truth. I was listening to their stories, and it was a great way, actually, of educating not only the audience, but educating myself as well. So now I feel I'm far more knowledgeable on the back of all those people who've been given a platform about, telling the truth about whether it's fraud, corruption with the banks, the government, talking about paedophilia, and so on, and the new world order and what we're hurtling towards. And these are the subjects that you won't find in mainstream media, because most people, if they have got a platform, are controlled in some way.
Definitely, that's one of my
that's basically it.
It
was a chance meeting of somebody who had a studios at a conference I was at 15 months ago now. They happened to have a film studios, and they said, we're looking for a new presenter, and I went and joined them, and that's where I did most of my initial interviews. It was just great, and of course now I've got my own platform, then I don't have to answer to anybody else, because once you're on a path and you're seeking the truth, people want to influence you one way or the other. They have their perspective on things, and you and I don't get paid for what we're doing, so we just think we're our own boss. We can do what we want, and we want to give as many people a platform as possible, to be honest.
I'm aware of the delay with this audio, Carol. I know we're having a few technical issues, but I agree totally with you on that, because we've all come from different walks of life to find ourselves on a journey, shall we say. You know, some people say it's the journey, but we're on a journey of a discovery where, as I spoke with you a bit off air, where my parents told me that I must pay my bills, I explained about when you do that, the problems that you create with the national debt because of it being a creditor in a debt-based economy. That absolutely smashed my world. The world shape for me. It went into pieces, Caroline, because everything that I've been taught now, I have to go back and analyze, because I've been told truth with lies, I've been told lies, and I've been told lies with truth. I need to find out where the truth is, and I don't think there's any one person that can do that. And that's why, again, I was fortunate enough to be asked on a few platforms, Raconteurs News being the last platform that I was on, that have given me a bit of a base where people are interested in listening to what I've got to say, but listening to people who have, from that grassroots level, where yourself, you know, you've decided that there's something not right here. I'm going to look into this. And then all of a sudden, you're sat in front of a camera. I never, ever thought that I'd be sitting. I mean, I know I'm not sat in front of a camera at the minute, because with all this technical issues, I think it's better to not tempt fate. But it's when I found, you hit the nail on the head just before we come on air, Caroline, when you said it's a lonely path, because you start telling people things that you've seen and they come straight from a belief and an emotional response straight away.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is, you've got a wealth of expertise in the financial field, which I don't actually know much about. I mean, you know, considering the charity work that I used to get involved in, I was the education spokesman, and I call a spokesman, not a spokesperson. I was a spokesman for a group of actuaries.
Yeah.
Now, actuaries are some of the most revered people in the world. I mean, they're quite well paid. They are very mathematical. They're very, very astute, and they're often employed by companies to work out forecasting for whatever reason. But initially, a lot of them came from the insurance, assurance, pensions industry, which is my first career. So I was unpaid, but I was trying to, with those technicians, you know, you can call them techies if you like, and translating what they were trying to communicate to me, and then I would take that information and transform it, you know, a bit of like a change manager, if you like, and change it for the normal sort of audience. So, you know, sometimes I would be flying up to Edinburgh to meet with them and discuss planning. Sometimes I would be talking, well, there was one time I actually spoke to 200-300 actuaries in their institute at Staple Inn in London. And then sometimes I would be talking to people in Canary Wharf about the future and a pension provision. So I was always very very keen to spread the message not to go into debt. And that was sort of, I think it's a northern, I detect a northern accent with you, Paul. Whereabouts are you from?
Lancashire, in between Liverpool,
Yes,
right bang in the middle between Liverpool and Manchester.
Okay, so we've had this, I think I remember now. Yes, I did say it was the wrong side of the Pennines, didn't I?
Yes, you did. And I said we were the right side of the Pennines.
But if you look at the map of England, Yorkshire is on the right and Lancashire is on the left. So basically, as a fellow northerner, I think it's something, it must be something in our water up there that brings us to this alignment that we must save and not go into debt. It was seen as a total disgrace in the family at one time. Do you remember, if somebody got themselves indebted? So when I see, the statistics are now that 1 in 2 children actually can go into debt before the age of 18. I found that statistic absolutely astonishing. And these children they go off to university, go straight from their family home to university. And then, of course, they've got all this online gambling. See, people used to think, or frown at people who were going into their bookie's office. But of course, that stigma, if there was a stigma, that stigma has now been removed, because those young people are going in and doing, the Foxy Bingo and all these online games. And they can get themselves seriously indebted because of the addiction. Once you start gambling, how do you stop? A few words at the bottom of a screen saying, stop when it's no more fun in it. How do you actually stop? So this is a big problem, because if you get indebted very young and you've got your university fees to pay for, we're subjecting potentially our younger generation to a lifetime of enslavement.
That's the name of the game, Caroline. These institutions that they're getting in debt with, these institutions, but you might say banks who are lending this money aren't lending the money. They are facilitating these kids' credit. So they're only creating what they're worth. There's nothing being lent to them. It's just in the terms and conditions as a company being given access to their credit, and they're borrowing it on their behalf through a power of attorney, and then they're lending it back to you. This is all the banks are doing with mortgages. These are the big scams. I mean, you're talking about stigmas. Those stigmas are being attacked across an agenda. You've got the sexualization of children on top of all that. You can't have conversations. I don't know if you've noticed this, Caroline, but a lot of kids, particularly I'd say 16 to 25 now, you can't have conversations with them. You can have sound bites with them, but not conversations.
Well, I mean, you can take that to the Facebook arena, and the memes. If you get a coloured background and get a meme on there, you're going to generate a lot more likes and hearts than you are if you're asking people to watch a 10, 20, 30-minute video. So we are on a soundbite lifestyle now, aren't we? People are too busy. They don't have the powers of concentration. And, you've got both parents, generally speaking, out at work. And everything is very busy. Traffic. I mean, if you're sat at home all day, you're totally oblivious to the fact the traffic problems out there. I mean, I live in an area which never used to have any traffic problems at all. But you see, they're now building in the green belt. They're now building so many new houses that we've still got the same infrastructure. They can't just automatically double the lane width overnight just because there's a few more council housing estates being built. So we are condemning ourselves really to a very sad end of life, really. And with the hospitals, with the privatizations, and the border controls, and of course the Facebook is full of, should it be Boris Johnson, should it be Jeremy Hunt, and it's like, well, what does it make? It's not going to make any difference.
No, it won't make one bit of difference whatsoever. And my forte is this money thing. When they're saying there's no money for the NHS, we've got to privatise, it is rubbish. put the right people in the job to do it, give them the pieces of paper that say, I promise. That's all that needs to be changed here. If we invested it within our infrastructure, I mean, you know, he's not the top of everybody's list, but when Adolf Hitler took over the Germany in 1933, he got rid of the central banking system, introduced labour notes, just like we did back in World War I. And we balanced our books for the first ever time. They're not interested in that. And do you know what? I've met with politicians, Caroline, independents, and I've sat for hours with these people and spoke to them about the bills of exchange and how it works, and how as a creditor you are meant to set off this debt, and promising to pay it just makes the debt worse. They all understood it, yet they all go round and point at rubbish bags that have been fly tipped and saying, I've got the council to come and move this, which is great. You know, we need people to do that, but there's no challenging being done at grassroots. And you hit the nail on the head, Caroline, when you said, as an individual, when I went into the county court and they used armed police on me, I, as a man on my own, I'm having my property stolen. I'm meant to report stolen property to the police, and they're helping them steal it. It was, you know, that was my awakening to how corrupt this, not just this system, but how corrupt this reality is. And my daughter is a photographer. She lives in the cucumber castle on top of a cherry oak tree with unicorns. She's not going to get this stuff, Caroline. And if I don't do it, then I'm not the man that my mum wanted me to be. I'm certainly not the father that I should be.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that you've hit the nail on the head insofar as people often, especially these days, they just think about themselves, their families, and the global elites have divided us by the newspapers we read, the channels, the TV, the colour we are, the religion we are. The churches are divisive. In many cases, I'm not saying, you know, you can't have a sweeping statement, but I do know, for example, that Church of England, in all the hierarchy, all those roles are filled by political appointees. They are political appointments. Okay, so you are
Nothing
going to
changed,
have no, exactly. So if you start ruffling a few feathers in the pew, or at the church, or in the, you know, the playground with the other parents, and so on, people will they will move away from you, because the push, when you're in this group situation, the push is from the top down, and we need it to be from the grassroots and back up.
Definitely. That's why what we were talking about, how it's just happened for you, that you bumped into somebody, they had a camera, they had a studio, they were looking for somebody. I've met people up here. I was talking about Eddie, Alder, and Justin, who'd come up to do a chartists event, and I spoke with them there. And it was about getting that grass movements to start talking to people. Small platforms like this, hooking up with other smaller platforms or even bigger platforms in your local areas. And I know a guy called Alan Davis has got a decent studio going, and we keep talking about getting together and bringing this stuff together, because everybody's got a piece of the puzzle, I find. You know, everybody is needed, I find, in this, whatever you want to call it, fight, Caroline, because I need somebody who's going to handcuff and concrete themselves in front of a fracking site, because I can't do that. So I need somebody who can do that. But other people may not understand bills of exchange and gas bills and how they're meant to be set off. That's mine. You know, I might not know the Constitution stuff as well as I should, but that's for other people to come on and talk to me about. Because if there's one thing that there's one thing I know for 100% is just how little I actually know about this reality.
Well, yes, and I had a vision that I mean, basically after the referendum, I could see that just by going into each of these groups and just putting a smattering of videos and my thoughts into these groups, and having a website set up with leaflets that didn't have a logo on. They weren't for, they were, what do you call it, non-partisan, if you like. If we could have had a database and strict facts about 5G, strict facts about fracking and climate change and vaccinations and so on, if we could have had a general website, and then instead of people crowdfunding for no apparent reason, they could have actually, if you could actually take control of your finances, not give it to somebody else, but actually say, right, I'm going to spend that £20 or £30, which I was going to pay to some sort of society or club or what have you. I'm going to print off these leaflets and I'm going to distribute them round my area. And, you know, that to me seemed a much more reasonable way of making progress. People taking back control.
Yes. Yeah, totally agree. That's why I've been trying to speak to the local independent
I also
councillors.
thought as well.
Again, they're really good at getting. Go on, sorry.
No.
It's this delay, Caroline. Go on, you carry on.
What were you going to say about councillors? Because when I stood for council, I realised that actually what these councillors were doing, they were following the government guidelines. And then if you look at the government guidelines, those government guidelines come from the UN, the EU. It's all Agenda 2021. So if you are a councillor, what do you actually have power over?
Nothing, absolutely nothing. As a councillor, you are instructed by whatever agenda you want to call it. I mean, it was 21, it's now 21, 2030, because everything is moving along swimmingly. What I've found with the councils is that the Section 151 officer, the chief financial officer, gets funds paid to them either, let's call it yearly, because I don't know how they get these funds, if it's monthly, if it's quarterly or yearly, but they, as inhabitants of your area, the council are liable for all duties. So as creditors, the council are meant to get rid of all your debts. They're meant to sign all this stuff off because they've been paid funds. But the trouble is, what's happening is the funds go into an account. We don't know they're there. So we forget about them, and then we go off and we try and promise to pay them, or we try some other form, and they say, oh, they don't want to use this. So we'll put it in this abandoned funds account, and we'll leave it there, and it's like lost property. If nobody comes to claim it, well, we can all have a bit of a bonus. Oh, you want that nice new flat? You want that nice new car? Here's a bit of a bonus for you. Just toe the party line. As long as you've got the corrupt individuals at the grassroots and you can't weed them out, then what is the point of going to the Houses of Parliament? Because if you can't change your local council and town hall, you're not going to change Parliament.
Well, they are put in place. I mean, I went to a few council meetings when I stood for Parliament, and local ones, and I was supporting people who were campaigning against solar panels, for example, because it was blighting the landscape. They didn't actually provide that much energy. Obviously, apart from days like today and the past couple of days, you don't always get it sunny. And they sell it on the premise that animals can actually graze underneath these solar panels. And in actual fact, these solar panels actually leach toxins into the soil. And that's something that they don't talk about. So I did go to a few of these meetings. It also involved, you know, putting opposition up against a local house building. And so what I saw was happening. If the councillors in that particular area had a good case, they might have a win. Initially, they would win on behalf of the residents, but the big business would come back, they would rejig their plans, and lo and behold, you know, 3 months down the line, everything goes through on the second attempt. So I thought, well, this is just a waste of direct democracy and override what has been set in their tablets of stone in Parliament, which never benefits the people like yourself and myself. It just keeps benefiting the global elites and their gophers, if you like, because it's not just the global elites, the hangers-on who are determined to take some of the spoils. So I mean, that's just like in Parliament. A lot people forget that the people chosen for Parliament, they're not chosen by the people. They're chosen by the elites again. You have to pass a test. You have to pass some sort of assessment. They look at your background. You come from a certain family, you know, that's how you get in. It's not accident. It's not the best people for the job. And that's what I think I'm seeing a lot more now, realizing, I think, well, why did that person make a mess of that health trust? And then they got this payoff of 160,000, like a golden spy. And then they suddenly, 3 months later, because I think there's probably a time limit where they can't go and look for another job, and then 3 months or 6 months later, they walk into another health trust job in a different part of the country. So what were they going to learn from their mistakes from the first health trust that they're going to take into the next health trust? I mean, this is where we talk about the revolving door, and it's jobs for the boys.
Most definitely. You can only look at Chris Grayling, who made a mess of the probation service. All the probation service went into liquidation, and then he offered ferry contracts to a company that didn't have any ferries. This is called money laundering, Caroline. That's all it is. He's feathering the nest, and he's money laundering.
Absolutely. But the thing is, I was thinking about this, how the governments have really, they've been complicit with all these arrangements. I mean, look at the number of MPs that are implicated in the Panama Papers, the Belize tax avoidance, or is it tax avoidance or tax mitigation, whichever word it is, you know what it means, really. Panama, what was the other, Paradise Papers, lots and lots of top politicians, Brexit politicians as well. They're no different to the other politicians at all.
No, and then you've got them coming down to the local levels. I mean, it's no secret. I've mentioned once or twice that Andy Bastard, I mean, Andy Burnham was my local MP for a time, and I was kept away from him for 4 years by his PA, Caroline, because I wanted to talk to the then Shadow Health Secretary that Christmas and winter's coming up. Can you tell me, I wanted to know why there's elderly people who are going to choose between heating or eating when they're not liable to pay for their heating. Couldn't get in to see him, was not interested. I was told to email his parliamentary account, which I did several times over the years, and I didn't even get an email back. These people aren't interested in helping the general public. They are interested in feathering nests and furthering, as you were talking about, maybe family bloodlines and ties, because as we all know, these elites, they intermarry, interbreed, because it keeps the wealth within the right realms. People like me and you shouldn't know about this stuff, let alone be allowed to talk about it, Caroline.
Well, it's interesting. I was just reading a document tonight before we went on air, and it's about the New World Order and the founding fathers. And in actual fact, it started off on a wintry afternoon in February 1891. And 3 chaps got together, Cecil Rhodes, William Stead, and Lord Esher. Was it Lord Esher? And then subsequently, they were joined by Rothschild, Salisbury, Rosebery, and Milner, and they all wanted to take control of the financial, political arenas. And look, lo and behold, if you, I was talking about the Serco, which is a New World Organization. Serco is it's run by a grandchild of Winston Churchill, and another grandchild, his brother, I think, is an MP or was an MP, and it's like they've kept these. This is the bloodline situation. They have carved out our businesses, and with the help of the EU and the UN and the corrupt parliaments, they have devised regulations which make it harder and harder for the man in the street to set up his own business in many types of businesses, because to comply with lots of regulations, you need to have serious money in your pocket these days. So it is harder. So I just don't envy the kids of today. I know a lot of people now are wanting to take early retirement, take their pensions and go, but who knows whether there's going to be a state pension for them as well. So no, don't rely on a state pension.
No, if anything, it looks like it's slanted towards an economic collapse rather than anything else, because all these pension pots I read an article this week where an elderly lady had been paying in a bit extra to a pension pot, and it's all gone. So even though she was paying more into it, she's got nothing. This woman's worked all her life, Caroline, and these people are taking everything. I mean, the TV license, I'll never understand why people are buying TV licenses anymore. I can't get my head around it. But to see an 101-year-old woman who's begging, please don't take my TV license off me, when she's already paying bills that she's not only not liable for, but can't pay. There's a different way to do things, yet this elderly lady's done everything that she can, and she's just going to be discarded. And, it's front page news on the papers because it's a political point. That's all we seem to have. You've got whatever the Tommy Robinson boat is. I mean, I don't know your position on Tommy Robinson, Caroline, but you were talking about people who have got platforms. This guy's got a hell of a platform, and when you've got legal teams that are involved that have got Israeli links, and he's going into £900,000 houses and all this, you've got all that round from a guy who grew up as from Millwall or whatever, watching football. There's something not right. There's something not right about all this.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to talk about paedophilia and to highlight the grooming gangs, and anybody and everybody is to be applauded for that. But if you're just focusing on one group of people who are doing it, then that's where I have always made my stand. I will not single out one group of people, because in actual fact, we've just seen Epstein, a Jewish guy who's got links to all over the world. So he's not Islamic, and he has he's already been to prison. So he has been found guilty. So we're not talking out of turn here. He is now facing, what's he facing now? He's probably going back to court, and then that implicates the royal family as well, because there are allegations against at least one of their members who's visited Epstein's Island. I did an interview actually with a guy called Mark Anthony Taylor yesterday. It's just gone on my YouTube channel, Caroline Stevens Seeking the Truth. I think some of you viewers will find it quite fascinating. We took some video footage taken from a drone of Epstein's Island, and you could see that actually, if you are a multimillionaire, which he is, and maybe was, you would expect to have a huge, beautiful mansion, myriad of swimming pools. He has got a very basic house on there. There are some very strange looking outbuildings, and this drone was able to see into the property at the other end of the island, and it looks all very, very strange. And you just have to say, this is not normal. And he's not a Muslim. So I'm just basically saying, please, people, do not single out a group of people. It is anybody and everybody who conducts themselves in this way then they're all open as well. Especially a lot of these people are in positions of power, like in the justice system, the police system, parliament, civil servants, and that's how they're able to be blackmailed by indulging in behavior that the likes of you and I and most people wouldn't find acceptable. And that's the crux of it. And it's these people that have allowed, they're the people at the root of the cause of allowing open door immigration.
Well, again, with the open door immigration, when you're looking back at things like the Kalergi plan from the 1920s, which was targeting demographics of people and communities, if you target a community and put a different cultural mix in there, you've got different culture, you've got different language, you're causing mistrust straight away. That was the whole part of the plan, because if you haven't got a community that's united, you've got a divisional community and they can't come together. So that's why you fan the flames of the propaganda. It mesmerizes me how people can get dragged into that rabbit hole, what you were saying, where you're singling out just one set of people. Paedophiles I know we've got a stereotype of paedophiles, but paedophiles don't always look like paedophiles, and they can work in very high-end jobs and top functioning, and especially when they're protected, because they may have something that's on them that it will come into a good use for some people. You look at the Lord Fortescue interview in the 70s by the BBC, where he said that civil servants or ministers would come to him with problems. Perhaps it's debt, perhaps it's a scandal with young boys, and we'd make it go away initially. And he says, I know it doesn't sound great, but we'd log up these brownie points, and then when we wanted something, we'd come along and say, do you remember when we did this for you? They've told us what they do, Caroline, throughout. Yeah, people, as you were saying, Jeremy Hunt, Boris, pick one of them, because they'll change it. I've got a mate who thinks Jeremy Corbyn will come in and save everybody. And I don't understand how you can't understand the controlled opposition game. What is the best kind of opposition? The one that you control.
Absolutely. I mean, let's be honest, if you and I were from the global elites and we are the 1%, and we're looking at everybody and thinking, wow, it wouldn't take much for them to break down the gates to our mansions. We do have our country pads in the Cotswolds. It wouldn't take much. So we have to dumb down the people. And in actual fact, as artificial intelligence is coming along, and many different types of jobs are now being replaced by computers, robots, and just basically globalization. You've got the big corporations that might have had a human resources department in every country they operated in, but now they decide to centralize and move all their human resources, say, to Switzerland. There's a lot more jobs that are being, the good jobs are being depleted. And so I've lost my train of thought now.
Well, we seem to have become in my 40 years, we seem to have become a nation of consumers and shelf stackers. We've not got the skills that we used to have. I mean, they were phasing, when I was coming through high school in the 80s, they were phasing out apprenticeships. You was going on to government-run schemes like YTS and things like that. You weren't guaranteed these jobs, and they were eventually phasing them out. You can now get diplomas. You can get degrees in stacking shelves. I know it's all about presentation and all that kind of caper and all this stuff to it, but this isn't going to help when there is nothing to put on these shelves. We don't know how to be self-sufficient. We should be teaching ourselves this. We had a greenhouse at the high school that was being phased out as I was coming through. Everything that we're taught is all about instant gratification, instant entertainment, and work as hard as you can for that. And it's that rat race thing that we've all been indoctrinated in. And then every so often, a dickhead like me will put his head up and go, what the hell's going on here? And
But
then everybody turns on you and goes, "You're a dickhead. You don't know what you're talking about."
But look at the way our society has developed. Most of us, say 30, 40 years ago, actually had a back garden. We had a backyard. We had something that would take away the draining of the rain. There would be something there. And now, and there'd be lots of parks. There'd be grass at the end of every street. And now, in those little spaces, I keep seeing houses popping up. And of course, these new builds, a lot of them have hardly any land at all with them. So you've got people being built up. You're going high rise again, back to the high rises, 3 and 4 stories. You've got nowhere. A lot of the houses now don't have garages. They've got no place to grow their own food. The allotments are being sold off by the councils. It's not really, and what people don't perhaps know is that the Infrastructure Act of 2015, which was passed through at the same time as the carrier bags came in at 5p, the government was quite keen to, and the MSM were quite keen to promote the fact that they were doing some good for the environment and charging 5p for a carrier bag. And of course, yes, overnight, people did, there was a big reduction in usage of these carrier bags. But the small print of the Infrastructure Act allowed the councils to sell public land to private ownership for house building.
Yeah, do you know what they did with Ashton near Wigan? Not Ashton, Manchester, but Ashton near Wigan. Ashton Town Hall was actually sold for £1, Caroline. It was sold for £1 to a private firm because the council wanted to build a new town hall, one of these new life centres that you don't interact with any humans on. But they wanted this new life centre building, but they decided that it was too expensive for the council to build it. So they sold the town hall off for a quid to a private firm who built the infrastructure and then rented it out to the council. That is jobs for the boys, and that is making money. That is definite money laundering.
And of course, the thing is, the person who bought it, that property wouldn't have been advertised in the local estate agents. It would have been one of their friends.
No, sweetheart deal.
Yeah. Yes, it's like a parallel. We're in a parallel. They're in a parallel universe, and I don't see how we're going to improve things unless we start removing money from these people. How do we break this? We've got to break down the heart of the beast, and that is the money supply, isn't it? I mean, people are saying, well, get money out of your banks and go into gold or other things. But at the end of the day, if you can't grow your own fruit and veg, and something terrible does happen, you can't actually eat gold, can you?
Well, we've seen it again with the Weimar Republic. If the economy collapses, I can have a wheelbarrow full of £10 notes, and I won't be able to buy a loaf of bread because inflation will go up that high. Now, if you're going to get to that point yet again, that means we've looked at history and learned absolutely nothing from this. These people are controlling the booms and busts. They decide whether we're going to suffer or we're not going to suffer. Until people snap out of that and want to change things for themselves, and I get the fear. Believe me, I really do get that fear factor thing, but everybody could make a stand about something. TV license, water, anybody can make a stand about something. Again, it comes down to, people always say to you, so you don't pay for anything. It's impossible. It would be impossible for me to just do that, unplug, and keep some form of life that is going. I've got family, I've got friends. How do I just live in a car park, or do I live in the forest? It's not. I can't do that, but I can find out things that I can then challenge. As I said to you before, we're at High Court with council tax. I've told you about the gas. I've done credit cards. I've done overdrafts. I've done mortgages with the banks. I've challenged all this stuff. I don't need to prove anything to anybody, but I've got information that people haven't looked at. And rather than call me a knobhead or I'm a thief or something like that, why don't you read it and get an understanding? And is it possible? Is it just possible that everything that you've been taught could be slightly slanted in other people's favour and not for your own? When we talk about registering property, kids and everything, we were talking about land then. Every piece of property in this land is deemed commercial. Your own home in law is deemed commercial unless you prove otherwise. The burden of proof is always on you. So when they're taking people to court for council tax, it's only a commercial property that is liable for council tax. But they're talking about terms within that act, within the Local Government Finance Act, that you don't know. So go and look, go and find out. They're talking about dwellings. What is a dwelling? Go and find out what a dwelling is. It will tell you that it is a commercial property and you're not liable. But you must understand how to present that, because they are using false case law with this. You know, we've gone through this. It's been over the internet for so many years. But people always fall down doing something wrong, or they move the goalposts, and that's what a lot of us have been doing, was trying to learn and act at the same time. That's the difficult part, because when 10 years ago, when I started to talk about bills of exchange, nobody knew about it. Nobody was talking about it, and I couldn't understand, because as you just said, it's everything is what I'll put in speech marks is money. Or the lack of this money thing that doesn't exist, that we buy into this belief that this piece of paper that says I promise will get me something. That's great as long as the economy's going, that'll work. But what happens when there's nothing on the shelves? What happens when there's no fuel in the car? What happens when your electric's gone and your gas is gone and they're cutting you off? You don't know what to do. That's why before we get to that stage, look back in history. We could maybe stop it, maybe change it, who knows? But it starts with every man and woman themselves. It had to start with you, Caroline, before you could get onto a platform and start debating people. You couldn't have just gone out and debated people if you hadn't have experienced and had a change in your thought patterns to go, wow, there's something really really wrong here.
Well, I think, you know, I've had a sort of a different change of careers, and I think that has, and I've gone into places that I never expected when I was 18, leaving school, that I would be speaking to the most influential people in the City of London. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Because what I realized on that financial campaign, I mean, you've just been talking about the small print in various acts. I realized that by the banks, the building societies were sponsoring a charity to get literature into the school classroom. And I started studying this literature, and I just thought, well, this literature, coming from a finance background as myself, it really is quite meaningless. And it's basically, from a bank's perspective, it's about them still making money. It's about awareness, their logo. It's just literally getting a foot in the door. It's actually, it's like corporate sponsorship. It is just PR. And I just thought, actually, this is not necessarily such a good thing, not in the way that this material is being presented.
Yeah, it's
so
mind
going back
control
to the
for
small
kids.
print,
Give the kids those images, don't they?
going back to the small print, I remember I'd been sent a government report because a couple of the actuaries were government actuaries. You know, the government has actuaries to work out how much they should charge for the, you know, the state pension, for example. And I did say to them, I remember saying to them at the time, and this is a few years ago, this is what, 6 years ago now, And I just said, well, what about the numbers of people coming into this country and wage compression? How are the figures going to stack up? How are you going to be able to pay these pensions? I said, you never raise these issues. They said, oh, no, we can't. We're just determined to get to our retirement. We're all taking early retirement and we're off. And that's it. You see, this is where the can has been kicked into the long grass, I have to say. So,
yeah.
So we've got a problem with the pensions and the small print. I've sent an actuarial report, and it basically said it's all right taking the banks and the building societies to educating the kids, but the government should be taking the banks and building societies to task by their small print, because in the policies, you know, the mortgage policies, all these different types of policies they sell you, the small print gets smaller and smaller. So you could have a degree in financial matters and you wouldn't be able to come out smelling of roses with some of the contracts that the banks, you know, do. So you can be educated, but the banks are always one step ahead.
Well, especially with them coming into the schools now, because people still believe, when I speak to them, that they actually went to a bank, the bank lent them money, and they bought their house. Now, that's as much as they need to know, because that was the process they went through, and they're buying their house. They don't need to know anything more. But the factor is, when you're talking about that small print there in the mortgage agreements, you've got a power of attorney. And the bank, you sign that agreement before the bank does anything, and you've just given power of attorney to a bank or building society to execute a document in your name. So they are going to act as you, access your credit account to facilitate your credit. But you've signed terms and conditions for you to pay that back to the creditor. The bank just don't inform them that you are both creditor and debtor. So the bank are creaming everything from lending you nothing. And one of the icing on the cake, Caroline, is let's call it, for argument's sake, £400 plus VAT for them to facilitate your credit. So if you want £100,000, they take off £400 plus VAT. That's their fee. The trouble is, they don't take it at the start of the agreement. They tag it on to the end of the 25-year agreement, and then charge you interest every year on the payment that you've not done for their services. So you actually only owe the bank £400 plus VAT plus interest for your facilitating your own credit. Now, when people can realise that and what kind of power that they would have if they acted as creditor, maybe people will go and look and find out how to act as creditor, because we are taught to act as debtor. That means you have no rights. That means that when they're talking to Mr., Miss, Mrs., they are trying to engage you into an agreement again that is going to get you a fine. You are not operating as a live human, as a live man or woman. You are operating as a dead entity. Most people still don't understand that.
Well, Paul, I think what we need to do is, with your expertise, I think we need to roll out a series of little videos. What do you think?
I'd love to do that. Like I said, I think there'll be one or two people in the chat room who will probably tell you that I do talk about this stuff quite a bit. And you know, when I was back on the old radio show, they didn't quite want it as much as when I bring it, because I can turn any conversation to this, because people always want to talk about money, Caroline. If you want to talk about footballers getting paid 200,000 pieces of paper a week, and they're changing that into real stuff like houses and things like that. And they are promoted. Why? Because it's an opiate of the masses. This is what we see the entertainment industry. We see all this, everything's there right before you. But if you can't turn Love Island off, or watch the omnibus of EastEnders or something like that, and just take an hour to learn something new, because you're passing this on to your kids.
Yeah, and if you have a debt, you know, and your mortgage, etc., you're passing that on to the kids as well, potentially. Their kids might be thinking they're going to inherit the house, and they don't.
Well, I did, Caroline. I inherited my parents' property, 30-year family home, and these people with no authority, using armed police, using video evidence gatherers, stole everything from me without a signature from me, and that's why I had to know how did you do that? Because for the first time in my life, I'd actually sat and studied and not believed and not thought, but knew, absolutely knew I was right, that you can't do this. But it's that jurisdictional thing. It's the jurisdictional question. Where do you get authority over me and my property? They get authority because they have authority over all things commerce. So they deal with everything commercially, from the letters that say Mr. on. And I know standing there and saying, I'm not a Mr., I'm a man, that doesn't work. It's like going into the rugby headquarters and arguing about football. The two jurisdictions don't mix. All the answers are within the acts that are brought and the statutes. When you're talking about regulations, regulations can only be there to sanction commercial agreements, because every single act that is passed through that legislator must be beneficial for man and woman. It can't deviate from that. But once it goes through to the executive, before it's drafted, start to add regulations. Oh, we'll make some money on that. We'll make some money on that. No, those regulations are for commercial aspects only. David Beckham got off from speeding with Nick Loophole. And the basics of what he said to the judge was, because he said, Mr. Beckham, you're caught speeding. And he says, well, it's section such a thing of the Road Traffic Act, isn't it? He says, yes. And he said, it's such a regulation. He went, excuse me, judge. He says, only the act that is applicable to Mr. Beckham. He says, if there's something wrong with this act, it must go back to the legislator and be redrafted, because it's not your job to write law at the bench. And he went, no case to answer. Now, that was meant to be a loophole. That's not a loophole. He's talking common sense. Is Beckham engaging in commerce at the time of that driving incident? No, he's not. Then therefore, it cannot be sanctioned by a regulation. The only reason he can do it is because he's got legal standing. And that is what they look at. There's no judge wanting to touch something like that when a barrister with standing like that says it's not your job to do this. So who's going to pick that up? There's not a judge in his right mind who'd pick that up. Yet a judge in my case turns case law over so that she can't see it and says, I can't see that. I take the bank's word that you owe them money. So there's a complete fraud from the bottom, the very, very bottom trough of the courts in my locals, and then it's going right up to the Royal Courts of Justice, and there's people there who are willing to cut the rope underneath them because they'll let these people go rather than them lose their trough. And that's what you do. That's what you're finding now. You're finding all the pigs are troughing at each other's troughs.
Right. Wow. Gosh. Did you get your property back in the end?
No, they stole everything, Caroline. Stole everything without a signature from me. Absolutely everything. And that's why I went off on this path, because I needed to know how they did it. And then when I found out how they'd done it, I wanted to tell other people. And that's what it was. I mean, I've had people at the BCG conference in Nottingham once. I had a guy who travelled 4 hours listening to me talk in his car, and then just to wait to shake my hand. And he said to me, Caroline, that I'd saved his life. And I looked at him and I said, I don't understand that. How have I saved your life? And he went, because I thought I was going mad with the stuff I was looking at. He said, I saw one of your videos. He says, the pennies just dropped. He says, and it was like a weight lifted off me. He said, and my family weren't speaking to me or anything. He says, but he says, it just justified everything. He said, so I come down. He said, I want to shake your hand and thank you. And I went, God, mate, I said, I was trying to save my own life, not try and save anybody else's, but I didn't know what to say to that, Caroline. And that's you know, you try and do what you can do. You're trying to do a 40-hour week and you're trying to do let people know as well. I mean, you walk into shops and you just drop a bomb and then walk out because people can't unhear stuff. You know, I go into my local shops and they say, "Oh, you're promising to pay for this," and they're joking about it. But you're learning while you're joking, and you know, it's what we were talking about. It's getting all these platforms and videos put together in some kind of a format. And technical is just not my forte. That's why there's no camera on now, because I've got a laptop that we're having technical issues with. And rather than not speak to you or keep freezing, I thought this has got to
We've got to do this.
But yeah, I'd love to. If you've got any ideas about videos, Caroline, I'd love to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, I was just saying before we came on air that I was being interviewed by Canada and America simultaneously last night, and Skype basically shut the call down. So yes, we've basically got to speak as much as we can before we shut down, and we need to find lots of alternative platforms. And I guess it is now the witching hour, isn't it? It was 8 till 9, did you say, Paul?
Yeah, we're 8 till 9's fine, Caroline. It's like I said, I've got an early start tomorrow anyway, but tonight was the best night for us to get together, and I'm so pleased that you got in touch with me, because I've got all these pokers in the fire that everybody said never nail anybody down, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, you just said, "Hey, we're meant to do this, aren't we?" And I went, "Yes, we'll get it on, we'll get it done." So before we go anywhere, Caroline, give us all your platforms where people can come and find you, and hopefully be able to find some videos that we can do together as well.
Well, thanks, Paul, for, as I say, for having me on your show. I've got my own YouTube channel, which I hope you don't mind me downloading this video tonight. That's Caroline Stevens Seeking the Truth. That's just been set up 6-8 weeks ago now. It's my own platform. There is nobody else involved in that platform. So, but I have brought a few videos from other platforms, and they're all now under one umbrella. And I've also got my own sort of a public profile on Facebook, and some of the videos are on there. And there's also another Facebook page called Corel, Korel, and you can find some of my work on there as well, some of my thoughts. So, Paul, let's get together very soon. We're both Northerners. We need to sort this country out, and people are now looking for a solution. Nobody seems to be producing a solution that has worked thus far, but I'm keen for us to get something that does work for the benefit of all the people.
Definitely, we are getting there. Can you just repeat your first site, because you froze this end, so I'm not sure if it went through. What was the first? Was it your YouTube page you gave out first?
Yeah, my YouTube channel, Caroline Stevens Seeking the Truth.
Brilliant. Well, what I'll do is I'll give you my number off Caroline, and then as and when you get sorted, obviously we'll have to liaise about times for work and things like that. But I'm really looking forward to that now, because it feels like a step in the right direction about my information. You know, that bills of exchange, Caroline, the money thing, it runs through everything, and I mean absolutely everything. You can't keep listening to people who say there's no money for stuff anymore. It's absolute rubbish. If you want to look at it as the government saying, right, we want a hole digging there. There's 30,000 pieces of paper, dig us that hole. And then somebody goes, well, what about a hole over here? No, we've no money for that. Meaning, we don't want to dig a hole there. That's the only situation we're in with the police, the fire, the NHS, the prison service, all the public sector. That, you know, we talk about the water being privatized, and electric and gas. The infrastructure is still ours. It's only the operational management, and those companies are meant to issue you with a bill for you to endorse, so you can set off the national debt, lowering national debt, and no austerity. if people can get their heads around that, we could make real changes monetarily, and you could take control of these companies who are smashing people's doors in and fitting meters that they've no jurisdiction to do, but they claim that it's commercial, and most people don't understand what is going on with that. So thanks again, Caroline. I'd love you to come back on, because you know, there's so much that we haven't been able to touch on, but I look forward to speaking with you off air, and we'll sort something out for that, definitely.
Thanks, Paul, and goodbye to everybody for now. Goodbye.
Cheers. Thanks to everybody in the chat room. Sorry I've not got round to many in the chat rooms. Again, like it is when Jason used to always say, you're having a good old chat amongst yourselves in there, but it's nice to see a few of you have come over and had a listen. And I know it's a bit short notice that you know, the shows are put together as and when, but I'm very grateful for your followings.